Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. My name is Matt. The script of Heartbeat, it's actually right side up with Steve Staggs. That's what we're really doing here. But, folks, it's great to have you here. This is episode 31. So now you finally have achieved and leveled up so that you can watch 2 hours of Steve Staggs every single day of any month you decide to do, right? So you could choose a month that has 31 days, and every single day you could spend 2 hours with me and Steve Staggs if you wanted to. That would be that sounds like torture in some respects. But folks, it's great to have you back. There's some great people here, but I'm excited because we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and we're going to talk about real intelligence too in the whole process. Hopefully we will. Hopefully we'll represent real intelligence. But of course, the reason he came and the reason I came is because of this guy, Steve Staggs. What's up, Steve?
Hey, dude, how you be?
I'm good. You're looking good. You're looking healthy.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that's at least one of the goals.
Yeah, you're doing well. You're looking good. Are
Yeah.
you looking forward to the Christmas time with grandkids and family and such?
Yeah, I have this great privilege, probably a lot of men do. I have this outstanding wife who is incredibly gifted at being able to do a lot of things. And she loves doing them. So I get to kind of kick back and enjoy the holidays with family and all of that stuff while she goes out and puts all of the stuff together. And so I have a great time doing what I'm good at, which is enjoying stuff. And she has a
Yeah.
great time doing what she does, which is putting it all together. So it's a good combination. So we're looking forward to it.
Well, it's nice to have roles
Yeah.
in the defined roles, and people actually enjoy their role
Yeah.
and are like, Steve, get out of the kitchen or get out of this thing, like get away, go do something else. And I like that actually because it's like a teamwork thing, and I find that is helpful. I was raised in a traditional role family. It sounds like you have that as well. I've got that as well, and I enjoy that as myself.
Yeah, we have really tried over the years to maintain that because, as all of us know, there virtually everything that is happening in the modern life is designed to pull the family apart.
Yeah.
And that's not a philosophical or moral or traditional comment. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
And so, like when our kids were growing up, we always made sure that we had, family dinner, sitting down. Well, guess whose house was the favorite house in every community we lived in during dinner time?
The Stags.
Yeah, because almost every night we would let one of our children invite one of their friends over who loved it. And so, that was a big deal. Coming to our house for dinner. Always, my wife always had cookies and things like that for the kids, and they would. I mean, it was just a stream of kids all the time, just because we sat down and had dinner together.
Yeah.
I mean, doggone, if that is not, the picture of the simplicity of success in a family, I just don't know what is.
You know what? One day, Steve, I hope to have a dinner with you and your wife, and have some perhaps red wine and red meat,
Oh
and then
yeah.
perhaps retreat somewhere for a long conversation over perhaps a single malt scotch or bourbon.
Hey, you set the date, and
You're there.
heaven and earth are going to have to get out of the way because we're
Yeah.
we're going to show up.
Wow, we'll have to get David Lee and Sam Kemp and Mike Costello. We'll have to get the whole crew together.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful to visit. There's something about that around the holiday time. I think I long for that.
Yeah.
And of course, you're a grandfather. I hope to be at some point a grandfather. And there is that stability. And when you say the kids loved being at your house, I mean, creating that environment of peace, number one, and two, also a place where you feel like somebody actually is interested in you. I like that dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Because that was the thing that we've all, I think, hopefully people have had in their lives somebody that was, genuinely interested in them. And I have a feeling that the reason that people and the kids liked being there is they felt very welcome.
Well, they were, and not only were they welcome, we were incredibly interested in them. And what's interesting that happens just by the simple thing of inviting them into your home to sit down and talk and be a part of your family, they will eventually start confiding in you and asking you for input, and then giving you permission to speak into their lives.
Yeah.
And so we had something we called powwows.
Okay.
And so if there was an issue going on, kid would come over and, and I could tell something was going on or they were getting involved in something. And I'd say, hey, why don't you come over and we'll have a powwow?
Mm.
And they'd say, sure, Mr. Staggs, when do you want to do that? And I said, you pick the time.
Yeah.
We'll just go take a walk and we'll have a powwow. And we would do that with individual kids. We'd also do it as group, as group of kids.
Mm.
And the thing is they invited you into, in this case, me, they would invite me into their world to speak into their lives. And it wasn't that I was trying to tell them how to live. They just knew there was somebody who was looking out for them to protect them, that they knew it was a safe place to be.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. I mean,
It's so powerful. And
yeah.
you know what is, and you're continuing to model that behavior with me as well, as like you're interested, right?
Yeah.
You're not first interesting. You're
Mm.
interested. You said, hey, I'm interested. And then, hey, are you open to this? Are
Yeah.
you interested in hearing some alternative view? I think you've said that many, many times. Hey, let me share with you a different way of looking at this, and all rooted in Jesus being alive and speaking, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. But let's have our virtual powwow today, Steve.
Right on. Let's do it.
Let's do it with Mike Ostell. He walks with me and he talks with me. Isn't that the truth? Good
Yeah.
morning, Steve and Matt, and all of you truth seekers. It's fun to do things in this format here. Quinn's here. What's up, Quinn?
Hey,
It's
hello,
so good
Quinn.
to have you. Hexonium is here, and of course, the legend of David Lee, all the way from southwestern Indiana. He's here, and Crypto Pez, coming in from Spain. Evening all, great to get another 2 hours of holy hopium. I love that. Thanks for keeping this going. Crypto Pez, thank you for doing this. It's cool to have, I imagine people and where they're at, right? And I always know you're in Spain, and I'm like, what's it like in Spain? And what time is it in Spain? It's got to be like 6, 7 p.m. And it's cool. It's really neat that people would tune in from around the world just to listen to a couple guys yak about Jesus. So thank you for being here. Hexonium says there are angels and demons. You just have to choose. Counsel comes from heaven. No more truth spoken there. That's going to be a big topic of this. Actually, we talked about, who are you? Who's paying your wages? Maybe that'll be a part of what we'll talk about today. Sam Kempf is here. Just dropping in for now. Absolute tracking down candidates. Good for you. Big stuff happening in the Texas nationalist movement and stuff with Texas.
Oh, he's in McKinney.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right near us.
Not far from you.
Yeah, not 10 miles away.
Rich Liberation. Good to see you. Sam's in. He's like, I'll have some red meat, some red wine, and some bourbon with you. Fantastic. And actually, what a wonderful, wouldn't it be great? I think about meetups and all that stuff. We ought to do that. We ought to have like the Texan meetup, and then we ought to throw in a little bonus for those who want to, squirrel away. That's good. Mike Ostell says, torture me with single malt 3 years after I gave up alcohol, but I would love the fellowship. Absolutely. And you know what? Sometimes, I can't handle much myself. Just for a lot of reasons, old man reasons. I love smoking a pipe and drinking coffee black. That combination is really, really good. I'm not a cigar guy at all, but I do enjoy that. Identity Block is here. Dude, thanks so much. It's so great. Identity Block has been like in everything I've been doing here in the last like month or so, and I just really appreciate that. Element Hacks, welcome. Hello, Matt and Steve.
Hello.
Well, cool. Well, we're going to talk about AI today,
wow.
Steve.
Yeah.
And so I had an experience that I wanted to throw at you because one of the coolest things that I've learned, and I've got this whole list of things I've learned from Steve and have been reinforced within 72 hours by Jesus himself. Um, but one of the things that I learned in all this is that the tools are neutral.
Yeah.
And so before we get into things, AI right now, if we boil it down, how do I use AI and what's happening in the world of AI? Um, it's a tool.
Yeah.
One of the ways I use it is I'll write a letter or I'll write an email or I'll write something that I want to communicate. And the cool thing about it is I can do that in a text stream, right? So Chat GPT, let's say I use, and I'll say, help me write this more clearly. And what's interesting is I've done that so much that you can start having this kind of conversation where you're getting um, consistency in the way that it's writing. And when I look at it, I'm like, it didn't change what I wanted to say, but I just know the spelling's correct, the punctuation, and it did reword this in a way that's a better way of saying it, because I've got a run-on sentence here or there. Well, that's very minor comparatively to what is, capable of doing. But I met a guy who was really, really into AI and is really knowledgeable about it. And there's a big spectrum here. There's a group of people who are like, this is going to be like Terminator and AI is going to take over and kill everybody, right? So that's one end of the spectrum. And then there's the other end of the spectrum that says, hey, we're going to have access to this, multi endpoint tool where you can engage with it in a lot of different ways and you could get access to things. And the implications of that are really significant. Um, because if you think about how the human brain works, is we take in information and we essentially distill it down. And if you think about, let's imagine you're a doctor and you go to school for 12 some odd years, memorizing all this stuff, doing all these things, having clinical stuff and everything. Next thing you know, you're on your own and somebody comes in, they got a bullet hole in them.
Mhm.
Well, that condensing is what your brain has done to say, all right, what do we do to get through this?
Yeah.
And, they obviously have built these systems to be very similar. But at the end of the day, you know, the approach that you take is essentially this animation. And so I wanted to set it up there, but will you talk about that, I think is a bit of a review is this idea of tools being animated. Cause I think that's going to be the underlying theme here is that, AI, provided that it's not, sentient, is a tool. Do you
Yeah.
see it that way?
Uh, Absolutely. If we think about it from a macro standpoint, what is the purpose to a tool? Well, there's this fundamental concept that time is the model for capacity. To increase capacity, you have to first increase capability. And so the one of the ways of envisioning or thinking about that is if I was given the job to dig a hole and all I had were my hands, well, my hands are my tool. They are my device of use of service at that point. And so, whatever period of time, my hands are only going to be able to produce so much because the capacity of my hands as a tool is limited. And so I can dig and dig and dig. And so I look down there, my hands are all, beat up and chewed up. And I've only got, a 3x3 pile of dirt in there. And I've been working for 10 hours. And I'm going, man, there's got to be a better way of doing this.
Yeah.
Tools as hands, I appreciate you as my tools of service. But there's a better way of doing this. So now I've got to increase my capability. And so what is a way to increase my capability? If I say, hey, at this rate, at a 3x3 pile, I'll be here for 25 years to get the job done. So what is it that I can do to increase my capacity? Oh, I got to increase first my capability. let's do this. Oh, let's see, how do I do that? What are some of the ways I could do that? The guy says, oh, I know what to do with that. So he says, I'm going to build another kind of tool. I'm going to call it a shovel. And now when I use that shovel, not only am I limited, now not only can I use my hands in a different level that increases my capability to increase capacity, but now I can also use my feet and my legs. Well, that all works great as long as, in the use of, toward achieving the mission. Now, if I am dedicated to achieving the mission and to achieve also the purpose of the mission, which is good, I can also then take that tool, whether it be my hands or that shovel, and I can turn it for evil. Well, how can I do that? Well, I can start holding people hostage to the use of the tool. I can use the tool as a way to extract from others what is precious and needful for them so that I can have it. I can take that tool and I can bash it over somebody's head because they're not complying to my requirements. The tool doesn't care in the sense of the use of the tool. It is simply a mechanism of service. The hands, the feet, everything, the body that's in motion is a mechanism, is a tool of service that is then using the tool of service, called a shovel in this instance, to then convert it from something of good that adds value to the human family to something that then is used as a weapon to extract from the human family the things that are valuable to them. Now, what is it that creates that change? Is it the tool?
Nope.
No, it's the one using the tool.
Right.
And the one using the tool is motivated by utilizing, our word is animating the tool to accomplish a selfish purpose and intention that exploits other for the purpose of benefiting me.
Yep.
Well, the tool is innocent in the matter. Okay? It's either going to be an instrument of service that provides benefit and blessing, or it's going to be an instrument of service that's going to provide exploitation and, man, just, I don't know any other word, but evil.
Yeah.
See? And it all depends on the one using it.
Yep. Well, and that's the theme.
It goes everywhere.
It does. And that is such a big idea that I don't know if everyone has related to. And it seems so, you made it so simple, right? So you've used the term, a gun sitting on a table would sit there forever. And now you're talking about a shovel. And I think it's really good to start at a very, very understandable base layer. You're like, your hands you could dig, but here's a shovel. Well, what is a shovel but a lever? And if you think about it, it has a bend in it for a reason.
Yeah.
And we can leverage ourselves, our weight. But you're right. If you keep it that simple and say, I could hit someone over the head with this, and I could use it as a weapon. I'm going to use it as a means of tilling the soil to bring, value. And so let's talk about the big rocks of all of this, because we're talking about tools of AI. The secondary piece of this too is we talk a lot over the last 30 episodes about the nature and character of how you animate.
Yeah.
So one of the things, it's like, okay, I see this kind of good and evil thing, but then also I have this kind of separate thing, which I would consider to be self, right? So I'm going to give an illustration. I want you to dissect these and help me with this.
Okay.
There's people in crypto who are influencers, and they use the tool of streaming and making videos on YouTube, and they have somebody that pays them, right? But they don't tell their audience that they're getting paid. And they shill something because they're getting paid, but they present it as if it's something that they're shilling it, and it's really a manipulation, right? So rather than hitting you over the head with a weapon, they're withholding information and manipulating essentially those that are viewing, right? So taking advantage of people by, convincing them to do something. And it doesn't have integrity. It's not true. And it's not always the case, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of this that's going on. It's easy for me to see, Steve, like shooting the gun at someone, right? And or digging a hole, or and using a shovel as a weapon. I get that difference, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of kind of gray area in the middle too, which is, I'm not actually, killing you with this, but I am not, my intent is not pure.
Yeah.
So if, for example, there's kind of, let's say, on this extreme end, there's those who have aligned themselves with evil forces, literally, right?
Yeah.
Literally, like, sold their soul to the devil and are accomplishing and doing his will and listening to him. And then you
Yeah.
got the opposite end of the spectrum of people listening to Jesus and saying, "Hey, I want to animate this tool in your nature and character." And then there's kind of this person that's in the middle who is self.
Yeah.
I feel like they're just like, "Hey, I'm just trying to make it here. I'm not real considerate of other people, and I'll do whatever I can do." And it's not like this conscious thing, like the devil made me do it. It's more of like, no, this is the way things do. I got to get mine.
Yeah.
Help me dissect the distance between those and how to see those. And maybe they're not three things, but they seem like there's a gradient. So go.
Welcome to our telephone conversations,
Go,
folks.
Steve. Dance, monkey.
Yeah, right. Um, well, in the caricature of the rocks, okay, let's keep it at a
Yeah.
rock level,
Yeah.
okay. Um, Jesus gave me a term for business many years ago that in 4 words captures it all.
Okay.
And those 4 words are truth in the transaction. Now think about that for a second. Truth in the transaction. Okay. Uh, a lot of people have asked me or then set out when they hear that to say, well, what is truth? Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Right? A lot of us will say, what is truth? And because we want to define it. And what I have said to them, and our friend Carter, really worked him over for some period of time, and it was, well, I don't have to define truth. Everybody already knows what it is by virtue of what it isn't. So you have mentioned a lot of time on your streams, for example, you have a very high sensitivity when somebody is trying to play you.
Yep.
Well, do you have to define what it is to be played?
No,
I would,
you get a sense of
yeah,
it.
you get a sense. I would just offer is because you know that there's not truth coming at you.
Yeah. Good point.
Whatever it is, it's not truth. Whatever truth is defined as, that ain't it. What that is that's coming at me is something that is trying to play me. It's trying to maneuver me, trying to manipulate me. And it doesn't matter. There can be 1,000 different mechanisms or tactics or techniques used, but every one of them has at its core utilization, the animating element of playing me.
Yeah.
Okay? So at the big rock level, devices are neutral. Money is a device. It is an outstanding tool to help make our trade efficient, seamless, simple, quantifiable, you know, It's a fabulous tool. And when there is truth in the transaction, when we exchange whatever we exchange, and we may not have a single spiritual thought or single evil good thought in our mind in that exchange, but we know there is this truth in it, whether it's integrity or satisfaction, doesn't matter what it is, we both know that neither of us are trying to exploit each other. Our trade is good. What you have, I need or desire, and what I have, you need or desire, and we make that change, that exchange. One of the elements that makes that efficient and easy is this thing called money. And so we make that exchange. Truth in the transaction. I'm not exploiting you. You're not exploiting me. What you have, I need or desire. What I have, you need or desire. And between the two of us, we are totally satisfied in the reciprocation of our exchange and intentions toward one another. Truth in the transaction.
Yep.
Okay. Well, you don't have to have a spiritual context to understand that.
Right.
You don't have to know a single thing, whether, what the devil is doing or what Jesus is doing or what the man in the moon is doing. You as an individual recognize that, and your senses are clean. Okay. Money is neutral, but takes the form of the person who owns it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's it. That's it. So now let's go to your example of the person who is promoting something, and I'm going to use different words to make sure I've got what you're saying. They're promoting something as useful and valuable and something that people need. When they no more believe that in the man in the moon, the only thing they're really interested is the extraction of money that is gained as a result of promoting that good or service. They will say it's good, but they don't believe it's good. They will say it's necessary and important, but they don't believe it's necessary and important. Well, what are they doing? There's not truth in the transaction. And it's the issue is not whether the good or service actually has value. It is the animating force behind the promotion of that good or service. And so then you have to make the decision, is that the kind of person I want to do business with? Because I have no sense of truth in this transaction. They're just playing me, using your words. Days gone by, I used to talk to sales groups and marketing groups, and they would want to know all of these, they were technique driven. And you and your audience ought to know by now that techniques to me are just tools.
Yeah.
They're devices, they're neutral. What I'm always interested in is the animating force that's behind it. And so I would say to them, by way of example, which now coming full circle to your illustration, if you want to sell, first serve.
Yeah.
Serve to sell.
Mm-hmm.
If you serve in your selling, they will come back and demand from you to sell them more. Just serve them in your selling.
Yep. Well, and it speaks to authenticity.
Yep.
And it's interesting. I was watching this conflict on display. I was watching an interview from after, I think it was 46, 47, something like that. And it was Oppenheimer reflecting upon what he had done.
Hmm.
And you could tell a very troubled man who, went along with this program. I mean, it took a long time for the Manhattan Project to get up and running, and what they did in New Mexico, and how people, enriching uranium across the country, and, all of the things that had to come together. Of course, there's a big movie made about it recently. But this ultimate, tool thing that had, such devastating force, and how people can be convinced to do something that takes great, great lengths and justify it.
Yeah.
right? And that was, I think, the challenge is to say, it's hard to know what would things look like if they had not dropped the bomb or hadn't built the bomb. And it's really, I think it's really fascinating because in some respects, you could look at AI and the way we see it right now, it's just a tool. And there's so many things that correlate to the spiritual side of things when you start thinking about the potential implications of AI,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that that's something that we ought to kind of throw out onto the table as for consideration.
Sure.
What I'm stunned with is how when we create, we can't help but create within the framework of God's creation. And we find that we're mimicking the things that he did because
Yeah.
we work on the framework, right?
Yeah.
I've talked to you before about how in games and in game design, you don't render the inside of trees, you render the outside of trees.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is in the quantum world, what's bizarre is it's like, well, we have this thing called superposition, and it doesn't become the state that it is until it's observed. And it's interesting that consciousness and who we are matters in the partnership between the creation and what is rendered,
Yeah.
right? Because the waveform collapses when we are actually observing it. And it's interesting that I think more and more people are examining this idea that what is the relationship between us and consciousness, which is unique from the animals, and it kind of determines the rendering, if you will, of the object, right? This in people, I would say, non-spiritual people would say it's kind of manifesting your future, right? Creating your own future. But then if you look at AI, it's funny to me that we have these stories before the flood of the Tower of Babel, and we see this you know becoming gods. And then here we are to once again, essentially getting to the point where we've got this transhumanist group of people who are really into AI thinking, okay, we can live forever. We can overcome death. And, the fear of that, and that we're going to become gods ourselves. And really, I think the challenge between kind of general intelligence and super intelligence is the sentient, this idea that, well, it's going to become its own thing.
Yeah.
It's going to, or at least give the illusion of its own thing, meaning that it's actually aware. And what I'm fascinated by is I read the book from the 1930s called "Think and Grow Rich" by Napoleon Hill, and it's one of
Yeah.
the first kind of self-help books of that era. And what's interesting is they talk about infinite intelligence. That's how he talks about God in that book, and he intentionally uses that rather than God, and I think partly to be appealing to a wider audience. And he talks about this idea that there is this interface. There's this one that you can talk to that knows everything, and that you could actually talk to this one person and have access not just to all of infinite intelligence, but the kind of intelligence that's necessary for you to accomplish the mission that you were created for.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what the last 31 episodes have been about. And it's interesting that what people that are in the kind of transhumanist world, they're trying to build a digital god. But
Yeah.
what's funny about it is it reflects the very nature of the actual God.
Yeah.
That they would have an interface, that they would have a friend that they would be able to chat with, that they would be able to interact with and talk to, who would give them information that is infinite. And
Yeah.
the irony of it is so like not lost on me. But to think that what's your take on that? That here we just can't help it. No matter who you are, you can't get away from the fact that you're trying to recreate what already exists.
Yeah. What a fun question. I mean, we could take up the rest of the episode on that question because it has so many tentacles that both flow into it and exit out of it. Um, okay, let's just take the concept of transhumanism, living for forever, et cetera, et cetera. Um, The Bible talks about this story called the flood. And prior to the flood, men were living 1,000 years as part of the first segment of quantifying the span of life, um, living apart from God, making the choice to live apart from Him. Now, the way that that was expressed is, both metaphorically as well as practically, by choosing to feast off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden story, as opposed to choosing to feast off the tree of life. So the first question I would ask is, why are we choosing to feast off the thing called knowledge with the promise of living forever, instead of feasting off the tree that tells you by its very name that you can live forever?
Yeah. Wow.
Why would you choose that other tree? That makes no sense.
The tree of knowledge.
If
Wow.
if the objective is to live forever, then hey, it wasn't even a question.
That's really cool. I've never thought about it that way. That is awesome.
Okay? So now, why would Eve first think in those terms? And more importantly, why would the serpent see that as an entry point to exploit? Well, because the real objective is not to live forever. The real objective is to be able to control my life forever.
Yeah.
I get to choose what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it. And as I do that, I want to do that forever because I choose not to die. All right. Well, okay. Jehovah says, all right, guys, I'll give you a shot at it. I'm going to give you 1,000 years in this first go around to see what happens when you live like that. You can live for 1,000 years. You can make all of your choices exactly the way that you want it without a single consideration for me. And let's see how it goes. And the way the scriptures describe it, the way Jehovah described it to Moses, who then wrote it in the book of Genesis, is that every thought and intention of the heart and mind was solely to do evil. Whoa. And if you actually go into the definitions of the words rather than the translation portrays Jehovah as being pissed off at the whole thing. And so pissed off, he regretted even making man. That's how the translators render those words. And it's 100% wrong. It is portraying a picture that did not exist and has nothing to do with the nature and character of God. God looked at them and felt sorry, felt compassion. What we would feel when we look at somebody in a deep sense of suffering. And so he said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. The outcome of this is that, yeah, you're getting a chance to do everything you want the way you want it without any barriers placed on you in which you don't know as you're being exploited in measures you cannot comprehend, and the effect of it, even though you were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, even though you were doing these things that satisfy the body in eating and drinking and satisfy the soul in marrying and giving marriage, and engaging in all of those things that would otherwise be considered a blessing, in not one of those things are you considering God in any of that. It's not that they were heinous. It wasn't that they were overtly wicked. It just that it had nothing of the life of God in it. They were not feasting on the tree of life. They were feasting on the tree of knowledge. And God said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect my man. I'm going to send a flood. I'm going to stop all of this. And before he ever did that, he said, I'm going to limit the life of my man to 120 years. Now, the way that we would describe that in our common vernacular is I'm going to deliver my children from their misery. And we're going to kind of start this thing over again. And you see that in the description of how Jehovah describes Noah, who did all that Jehovah commanded. Now think about that. If you define evil, this is the way Jesus defined it to me, evil is any thought, intention, or action that is apart from God. That's evil. It can look like the greatest thing in the world. So while it looks good, it doesn't have good because it is absent of the presence of God's life in it. That's why it's evil. It's not that it's heinous or malicious or wicked. It's just that it doesn't have any life in it. It's born out of knowledge, out of the mind and heart of the individual. And so because the individual is limited, subject to death, all it can do is produce limitation and death. Well, God doesn't look at that as good. God looks at that as evil and says, hey, man, I got a better way for you. And so he says about Noah, in contrast to every other one where there was not one single thought that was not saturated and conceived in evil. By contrast, he describes Noah as doing all that Jehovah had commanded. Wow, what a contrast.
What a contrast.
Okay. And the one who did all that God commanded was doing stuff he had no experience in, had never observed, had no engineering training. There's no record of him being a carpenter. There's no record of him having any tools of any sophistication to be able to do anything. And yet, what was 120 years and he built an ark that we marvel at today with all of our capabilities because he did all that Jehovah commanded. Well, Matt, that to me is okay. Now let's weave that all the way back to the AI transhumanists and stuff like that. Well, yeah. Okay, have at it, boys. So if you live 1,000 years and what increases in you is what is already there, which is perverse to its core, in 1,000 years, what's that perversion going to look like in you? I want no part of that. God, give me my 120 years and let's call it good.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much in that.
So that's the big rock.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at the whole transhumanism and using this stuff to live forever. You know, it's not about living forever. It's about being able to have the absolute liberty to make whatever decisions, do whatever you do without consequence forever.
Yeah.
And all you're going to end up doing is producing misery for you and everybody around you, even though you're eating, drinking, and marrying, giving in marriage.
Yeah. It's an illusion. You know what's amazing, Steve? This is so good. This is so good. You know what I love about it? So I'm gonna bring. So let's go to this moment where the commandment of God to Noah. Okay, so let's just imagine it's us, right? So everybody who's listening to this, it's us, and we're there. So what you're saying, Steve, is that at that time when all this craziness was happening, that Noah was listening to Jehovah.
Yep.
And what's fascinating about this is, you said so many times, it's so simple.
Yeah.
Like the more and more you look at it, it's like, wow, it's simple, and you can continue to probe this. What I think is so amazing about this journey with you and in all of this is that it constantly comes back to the lowest common denominator. And it's like the story after story after story is one who is walking with God, who says, all right, I'm going to take your word for it that you got something for me to do.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make that assumption that I'm not here by accident. And so rather than going and feasting off this tree of knowledge, I'm going to feast off this tree of life, which is what is life while I'm here, but you.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you know exactly why you made me and why you put me here and what to accomplish. So, it's interesting that Jesus would knock on your door and say, "Hey, you interested?" And I love the way that you present it, right? "Hey, are you interested?" Well, yeah, what we're saying is there's a hell of a benefit to this thing if you actually like are interested. It's like, "Hey, this is the way, right? The way, the truth, the life." Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one of the big challenges of all this, and it's so binary in some respects because you're like, hold on, does this God, does this Jesus character, does this guy actually speak? Well, whenever I'm looking at scriptures, it seems like that's the story. The
Yeah.
story is a God who interacts with his people and gives them purpose, direction, commandments, all of these things so that things would go well for them.
Yes.
That there is compassion, there is direction. Now, you're going to see it as, consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kinds. You need to understand that these trials are a part of this thing, but that ultimately there's purpose in it. And what's so beautiful about this is how cleanly and simply you have nailed the whole AI thing. And it's once again man going his own way saying, "Hey, I want to be in control of my I don't want to submit to anyone else. I want, I want to I want all the power and all the knowledge and all the stuff." And it's interesting how much of that is a lie. Because now help me understand this. I see that as this fundamental of, hey, do you want to go your own way or you want to go my way? But then there's also this one to say AI is a tool.
Yeah.
Steve, I use it to make sure I can communicate more clearly, and it helps me do that. I use a shovel and it helps me dig more. And then, hey, if I want to utilize a backhoe, we can get a lot done. The intent that I have in that, and it even says in the scriptures about what the cost is if you kill your neighbor's bull on purpose or by accident,
Yes.
which is
Yep.
really this concept of intent.
Yes.
And it seems like we've got some freedom to move forward with the tools.
Yeah.
And I don't know which way it's going to go. I think a lot of people think, well, it's going to be like Terminator and they're going to, turn around and enslave us and in that. But it sounds like, at least where it sits right now, that this tool that promises access to knowledge is, in a way, this choice that Satan made to Jesus himself.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll give you all of these things if you just give me your authority.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you get to benefit from the tool if you don't. And it comes back to the whole, you can't serve God and money.
Yeah.
Right? It's like very, very straightforward. Like, it's a tool. It's not a God.
Yeah.
Wow, we did that in 50 minutes, Steve.
Ready to move on.
That is so legit. It's so big. And you know what, Steve, I love about it? It's like we didn't prep anything. I just said, hey, we're going to talk about AI. And you just brought the heat. Folks, I hope you see this stuff like I see it. I'm just absolutely blown away by it. Because you know what's so neat about it is it resonates as true, Steve. And it makes things so simple. And it almost sheds its complexity.
Yeah.
Like all of the complexity of the conversations that we often have, and I listen to, and all the details of how this works and how it's like a brain and neural networks and systems and all that. But then you think about it. Well, what is it saying to you? It's like, do you want to feast off all this knowledge? Well, you're right. Yeah. If you put money in its proper place, it's a great tool. If you
Yes.
put the internet in the right place, it's a good tool. So let me ask you this. There's obviously, with someone like Noah, there's the directive and the outcome that we see, which is a big ass boat.
Yeah.
There's a boat, right? There's not always that kind of clarity for everyone that approaches this Jesus, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't say, like, hey, Jesus, what do you want to do? The boat thing I told you about yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before. That's not what I'm getting, Steve. I'm
Yeah.
not getting boat, 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 boat. How does one traverse this to say, all right, there's obviously a lot of freedom in this as well?
Yeah.
Um, but I love how you outlined this idea of nature and character. Can you weave those things together too? Because not everyone is called to build a boat.
Yeah.
So how does what people would consider, how's the average Joe engage in this when not everyone is chosen to build the boat to save humanity?
Yeah.
To talk to that, because I think that that's a issue that a lot of people deal with. It's nice to look and point out the guy who saves, does this big thing, but what about the person who doesn't feel like they did the big thing? They still want to do this the right way.
Well, the question I asked is what makes you think that whatever you're doing is not a big thing?
Yes, in man's eyes, you're absolutely right.
You know,
Absolutely.
you, that every one of us who produce offspring produce eternal beings.
Mm,
So whatever that child is going to do, we open the show about kids coming into the
yeah.
house, and
Yeah.
why? Well, I'm totally interested in them, and one of many of the interested elements in me is this is an eternal being. This person is going to impact eternity and everything that eternity is comprised of for eternity. Now, if that's not big, man, I'm having trouble defining big.
That's a good point. It's so helpful to say that though, Steve. The world doesn't say that to like a mom who's beat down. You know what I mean? The world isn't saying to her, "Well, hey, look, you're creating eternal beings." That's helpful in my opinion.
Well, it's perspective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's in what I'll describe, it's the difference between the perspective that comes out of the tree of knowledge of good and evil from the perspective that comes out of the tree of life.
Yeah.
This is a living being that you are interacting with. You are a living being. You will produce forever. What is it that you're interested in producing?
Hmm.
Are you interested in producing something that will continue forever? Or are you interested in only just the momentary impact and effects I'll have? I mean, it does not take a genius to sit back and say, is this action, or thought going to produce something of value that adds value to the human family? Now, you may not use those precise words, but the concepts are still there no matter how a person thinks.
Hmm.
Am I going to do this for the benefit of others? Am I doing this for the benefit of myself alone? You deal with it all the time on your stream,
Yeah.
considering others in addition to yourself. Well, what is that? That's a connected thought. That is a connected motivation. That's a connected intent with the intent of producing a valuable connected service, product, or service that benefits humanity. Well, that's not complicated. That's pretty dang simple. And so the first part of my answer to you is there's not a person listening to this or exists on the planet that is not producing a boat,
Hmm.
whether they understand it or not.
Wow, that's
Okay?
so good, Steve. That is
Just
so
keep
good.
taking the steps.
Yeah. Well, wow. Wow.
Okay? And so what you're doing is you're looking through the lens of life that says, man, this thing isn't stopping at the end of this little road here. The end of that road is just the beginning of the next road,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
the beginning of the next road, which is the beginning of the next. Okay? That's why Jesus says, by the way, follow me.
Yeah.
Just follow me, man. I'm just follow me. See what it's like. Okay?
Well,
You'll dig it. Trust me.
and you know what's so cool, and I'm gonna go onto a rabbit trail here because I'm just overwhelmed with how awesome this is. You know, we talked about Peter, James, and John, and they're seeing Jesus talk to Moses and Elijah. And you said one, I don't know if it was like episode 17. You said, "What are they talking to him about?" They're conferring. Like, imagine you're standing off, and here's the transfigured Jesus, right? And like he's talking to Moses and Elijah, and you're like, I think you said they're not dead. And now think about this for a second. And I think about my dad passing, and I think about this idea of, you just said, "Hey, you raise children that are eternal." And you think about this kind of waypoint that this life is, right? It went from 1,000 years pre-flood, and maybe even before that, much longer. And there's a lot more to this story than we see and know. And then it was by grace shortened.
Yes.
And, at times I think about, there is a certain discipline here. And one of the things that I feel like you've been really helpful for me to understand is, this idea of nature character and the choices that we make is a form of discipline, right?
Yes.
Like I'm thinking about these things differently now. And I'm like, what is, like I have to have there's a lot of things like, for example, if I were to go out on a bender and drink a bunch, I'd feel like crap in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be less effective. I also see that if I don't keep my blood sugar together, I'm not as effective. If I don't get enough sleep, I'm not as effective. Right? There's a number of things where um and it's interesting to think and to hold these thoughts captive to the very simple, and that's what I love about this framework is that even in the depths of its complexity, if you back out from it and have the right perspective, it's simple. You have this, at least these waking moments of choice. And you can either choose to do it apart from or with God. And what does it mean? In some respects, do I always carry around, you know, my buddy Jesus? Well, in some respects, his nature and character, right? He, created in his image. Yes, you do carry him around with you. And it reminds me of you and, leaving baseball and going, yeah, let's go. Let's go places together. And but also to recognize, and I feel like this is what this whole series of things has helped me with, is to just be thinking about in every moment, what is the nature and character, right? Because you know the benefit of considering others in addition to yourself, understanding that Moses and Elijah are alive, just all of these things together, you're going, okay, it gives me way, way, way more confidence of moving forward, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, it's really interesting, and I love. Thank you for saying we're all building a boat.
Well,
I
think
really
about
think.
this.
Yeah, go.
No, again, think about this. Um, Jesus gets crucified. We, celebrate Christmas. I mean, we celebrate all kinds of, you know, holidays, Christmas for him being born, Easter for his resurrection,
Hmm.
as the culmination of the crucifixion. And next to him is this guy who is a thief and a murderer.
Right.
And this thief and murderer says to him, "Hey, Jesus, why don't you, if you're the Son of God, why don't you prove that by climbing down off that cross and taking us with you?" And then there was another thief next to him who says, "Dude, you and I deserve to be here. Leave him alone. He is an innocent man. He does not belong here." Now, nobody paused to stop and say, "Well, then why is he there?"
Right.
That's left for us to inquire about. Well, if you're innocent, then why in the heck are you there? What really are you doing? And then he says to Jesus, he says, "Remember me in paradise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember me when you come into your throne."
Yeah. When you come into your kingdom,
Yeah,
how amazing.
yeah.
Wow.
Jesus says, "Hey, cool. We'll do that this afternoon." That sound good to you?
Wow.
Now, that thief, the culmination of his life was to make that declaration. How much bigger of a boat do you want that guy to build?
No. Hmm.
He just portrayed to everyone who observed that scene and those who have read about it for centuries, he's describing something that is so simple and profound in the realization he switched from the tree of knowledge to the tree of life, while the other did exactly the opposite. And both are portraying that have for thousand, now 2,000 years. How much bigger of a boat do you want?
Yeah. I think about every time I go to a funeral, I think about that. That's like the one thing that's always in the front of my mind is today you'll be with me in paradise.
Yeah,
And you think about that, all of the things that we argue about and the church wrestles with. And here's this one who, stands condemned and this, hey, remember me. And of course, there's so much wrapped up in this idea of speaking and looking Jesus and just saying, remember me in your kingdom.
yeah.
It says so much about how his heart is and what he understands Jesus to be. And it's how cool that you can bring that what you're saying to this binary thing between the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And it's interesting. Yeah. And once again, simplicity.
Well, Jesus said, one of the things that Jesus said to folks when that's recorded in the Gospels is that unless you are willing, uh, he said it like this: you cannot enter into the kingdom unless you enter as a child. Well, one of the difficulties that we have in this, that is a direct confrontation to the promise of knowledge. When
Yeah.
I'm an
Yeah.
adult, I do not want to think like a child anymore. I've spent an entire lifetime ridding myself of that.
Hmm.
Now, that may not be the way that you describe it, but the effect of that is that the poison of knowledge says, injects into the whole process. No, I want to understand the kingdom as an adult in the kingdom now. And Jesus says, well, that's not how it works. Okay, I mean, we've given you a model for how this whole thing works. Now, when you had your little baby and there was laying in the crib, was your baby saying to you, "Man, I want to really understand how you changed the plugs in the car that you drove me home from the hospital in, Dad? How did that actually work?" No, what happened again is now back to your, the nature and character thing. The nature and character is not a philosophical concept. It is a description of the essence of the being that is at work within the individual. So now back to the crib and the child that we talked about it before. Did the parent gain the trust, confidence, and love of the baby because the baby understood what it was to be an adult?
No.
No. They simply experienced and saw the nature and character of love being projected to them from mommy and daddy. They felt it, they experienced it, and it was something different than what they were experiencing by themselves. They didn't experience that in the hospital from the nurse. They didn't experience that, in some religions in the baptism. They experienced it in the crib or in the holding of mom and dad. They didn't understand a word that was spoken or how any of this was done. They just felt something that was bigger and greater than them that swallowed them up into this feeling of some sort that they could not describe. Now, did mom and dad define what nature and character was? No, it was the essence of who they are, the essence of who they are in their being. Well, guess what? We know certain parents that don't do that.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say.
We know certain parents that do exactly the opposite. And what do we call both the parents and their children as a result? Do we call them blessed? No, we weep over them. We would have a tendency to condemn the parents that we would actually call them abusive.
Yeah.
And then we look at the children who are the products of that abuse, and guess what they reflect? The nature and character of their abusers. And they are troubled the entire time of their life until, guess what? They make a change. At some point, they will have the opportunity to change, to make a different decision. And then Jesus begins to build in them. If they choose him, he begins to build in them his nature and character. See? It's a building process.
Delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart.
Yeah.
I totally misunderstood that for so long, thinking it's what I would want, but it's really actually a redefinition of what he wants through me.
Yes.
And it's so powerful. I think what's so neat, we talked about kind of infinite resolution and the fact that the framework, almost represents itself. And here you are talking about the baby again, right? I mean, the science folks would say, yeah, if the child doesn't have this, the eyes of the mother or father doesn't have this, the brain does not develop correctly.
Yeah.
And you think about what is connecting through all of those things. And then to think of the metaphor, because what I've been kind of thinking about recently is this idea of how great and how expansive God is, right? I just look at his creation of the heavens declare, and I'm like, wow. But to think that in all of this, that there would be such lengths gone to utilize these metaphors, right, of a father and a son, to use these, this metaphor of nature, not metaphor, but the nature and character that is expressed across creation. And I think what's so cool about, what we're doing here with the crypto stuff and everything is to look at it and say, we know that something is wrong, because when I do look out, and I'm in the middle of a stream with a fly rod, I'm seeing the nature and character in his creation, right? It declares itself.
Yeah.
And then, seeing those moments. And what do we long for? I mean, I long to daisy chain as many of those good nature and character things together as I can, right?
Yeah.
I want to sit with you by a fire and with David Lee and Sam Kemp and Identity Block, right? And I want to sit there and I want to bask in the goodness of his nature and character that is expressed through you, right? And or through David Lee coming to my dad's funeral.
Yeah.
And I think about these things, what decisions are we making and how does that contribute? And, you said to me episodes back, you said, when Jesus was here, was the kingdom near? and I just love it, right?
Yeah.
And you think about that, and I know this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but it's part and parcel of the same thing. We create, and are all of us, Da Vinci? No. We create. Are we all Mozart? No. But what's interesting is it's all in its perfect form, a version of the truth. It is it's a picture of a truth, and I think about Ray and his daughter, who's a ballerina, right? So she's, in boarding school, focused completely on being the best ballet dancer she can be.
Oh, cool.
And there's this moment, and we've all seen it. We've seen it in art, we've seen it in music, we've seen it in dance, we've seen it where someone with preparation meets this opportunity moment and it takes our breath away. And we
Yeah.
see in that moment truth. We
Yeah.
see in it authenticity. We see in it perfection. And we get a picture or a snapshot of God Himself. Like, I feel like that's essentially this. And, here we are in such, times of turmoil and crisis. And when I think about what's the purpose of us building our own boats, is this idea that my kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Like, this idea that we play a role. And what's interesting is, like, this holiday season, right? This Christmas, I could contribute to and express the nature and character of God in my home. Or I could choose something else.
Yes. Yes.
And it seems like, that's where it's almost like the story about how the guy was forgiven his debt and then he went beat the guy that owed him money.
Yeah.
Is that seems to be the amazing grace that people sing about, this idea that I no longer desire to beat the one who owes me,
Yeah.
because I recognize how much I have been forgiven.
Yes.
That this is like, it's like it all is shed. And that's, I guess that's the piece that transcends all understanding, right? That's kind of where it meets. What a beautiful thing, Steve. And it's like, what is the benefit? I mean, it's rest, right? It's like, it's wholeness, it's oneness. And I often think about, what is heaven like, Steve?
Yeah.
And it's like this idea, well, it's not that I'm not gonna get sick, and but there are some leaves I could probably eat that are gonna help me out. But this idea of being this wholeness or oneness, and we see that picture so many times of, you know bride and groom and male and female, and oneness of wholeness and completeness. And it's interesting that for this 120 years that we have now, that He would allow us to walk through this assemblage of knowledge. And it does feel like training. It feels like training for, what are you going to choose? What are you going to choose? And now I look at the transhumanists, I look at the World Economic Forum, I look at those that are being the ones that want to extract, right? The ones that are wanting to enslave. And it's like, well, no wonder the playbook is to separate the family, to get you to be confused about the things that are obvious, like your gender. These, essentially removing the things that are the nature and character of God that are within us, and basically making you confused about who you are.
Yeah.
And it's like, and when you start seeing it that way, you see it almost coming at you from every angle, is that ultimately this goal is to subject you and enslave you. And it seems like right now we're coming into a time where everything is changing and being exposed, and like an opportunity for God's people to say, hey, let's choose His way versus my way. And what would be the net effect of that? That's just mind blowing, Steve.
Well, it's so very simple, isn't it? Because you know, again, if you're paying attention to anything that's going on the planet, and in today's world, we can see the entire operation of the planet through this little mechanism that you and I are talking through right now.
It's so true.
Okay. Now, you wind back the clock a couple hundred years ago, you couldn't do that.
No.
200 years, well, shoot, 100 years ago,
Yep.
you could not do that. Um, whatever was happening around the world, there had to be you know, a pretty concerted effort to bring that information, to the world. Today it's spontaneous. And so, you know, okay, folks, AI. So you're going to use AI, and now you get to be the guy who decides how AI is going to be used. And one of the options is to use it to where we could build other machines where the animating element within a human can be transported into that machine that can then has a life cycle of its own, and can continue to be recycled however whatever that life cycle looks like. So it's a 50-year life cycle. In 50 years you get yourself another machine. You get to have another Tesla. You go, wow, that's really pretty cool, man. Because when I see the original Teslas compared to today, wow, they're a lot more sophisticated today. Even though the originals were pretty daggone
Yep.
sophisticated. Man, I wonder where this is going to end up. You go, that's pretty cool. Well, folks, we don't have our Teslas today, but we do have animating forces that are animating the current devices on the planet, ranging from a ballpoint pen to the powers and levers of government and every institution of influence and power in between. Well, folks, what do you think about that? Are you happy with not only continuing this, but amplifying it? Well, say, I mean, gosh, I look at that and I say, not on your flipping life. Thank you, Lord. I only have 80 or 90 years
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Yep.
See, now guess what? My life is not limited to 80 or 90 years. My life is eternal. What is limited to 80 or 90 years is my time on this planet. Or do I want to say, hey, no, that's not what I'm going to do. That's not what we're going to do. We got to change some things. Now, what is it that we're going to change? Are we going to change devices? Man, we got all the devices we can handle. We cannot manage all the devices and capabilities those devices produce. What are we going to do? Well, I, for one, am saying, hey, let's do something different. Okay. Now, I don't know what to do different on a macro level, but I do know what to do different on a micro level.
True.
In me.
Yeah.
So if I change me, then maybe what I do can then affect others. And if others decide to make a similar choice, then okay, then they change in everything in their area of influence, and it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. Oh, that kind of sounds like the parable of the leaven in the three lumps of dough. That's how the tree of life functions. How is your life going? Are you happy with the way things are coming together? Is there something different that you would like to have happen in your life? You choose.
Yeah.
That's not how we're trained. We're trained to look outside and criticize all the wrong that's happening out there and what needs to be done to fix everything out there without fixing me first. Man, I ran into that all the time in my consulting business. Change what my business is doing, but don't change me.
Yeah.
Dude, you're the guy that's making that happen.
Right.
I can tweak some devices, I can tweak some processes, I can do some procedural things, but it's all going to end up in the same thing because you're the one that's controlling it all. You are the expression. Your business is an expression of you. If you want your business to change, you have to change.
Yeah. I think about the person who's been married 4 times It's always someone else's fault, huh?
See, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it goes everywhere. Okay,
it does.
what's crypto
So
saying?
yeah, so AI and superintelligence mode could be considered the false prophet. People will believe everything it says and will use it like an oracle. This is interesting, and I saw this comment, and I want to talk about it. In the context of the tools, right? Is what we're really talking about, which I think you just mentioned, is what is your purview? What responsibility do you have? Well, first and foremost, it's you, right? That's the point you
Yeah,
just made.
yeah,
And you think about this, if this device exists, right? Well, are there people right now who get caught up in things that aren't super intelligent that actually basically command and direct their lives? Absolutely. There's all kinds of things that we get ourselves into, whether it's addiction, whether it's relationships, there's all kinds of things that we end up submitting ourselves to and we become subject to. And so, this idea that there would be one who would be a false prophet or would be like an oracle, I don't know. Is it going to be, is it going to present itself as a entity, right? So some people would say, and I heard this last night when I was watching the whole thing between Tucker Carlson and what's his name, Alex Jones, is that there are some people who believe that this is just going to become, this antichrist, right? That this will be this entity that is perceived as sentient and is, I think there's a lot of fear around this that would be like God, like this would be the false prophet, if you will. And what I feel like I'm learning from you today is to say, in Jesus, you have control of your own actions, of your own self, of your own choice. Now, there are some people who are extreme preppers who will be like, well, get out to the rural areas, dig yourself a home and start yourself a fire and cook your meal and be away from all of this stuff. Okay, fine. But whether you're doing that, you're still making your own personal decisions. And the
yeah,
question is, are you engaging with this? Do I see this tool like Steve or like David Lee said that people are using this tool right now to auto select targets in drone warfare? Yeah. Yeah, they're animating this tool to pick out moving objects to be able to fire upon. Will they get to the point where it fires on its own and kills people? Well, yeah, probably. The question is it going to have some sort of spiritual power over you? And I would say the one who is in you is greater than the one who's in the world, and that you will continue to have the choice. How do you see it? I think there's a lot of people who are drumming up a lot of fear around the Antichrist and the, taking over of AI as being this boogeyman. But what I hear from you is to say, well, these are tools and you have choice.
yeah.
Enslavement is possible, but how do you see it?
Well, being enslaved is only a threat if you know you're enslaved. If you think that you're free while you're a slave, guess what? That's the best possible state for you to be in insofar as your enslaver is concerned.
That's the Matrix movie right there.
Okay? Well, there you go. These things are basic and fundamental. So let's kind of take a little bit of a crack at this. Um, Okay, how does AI come? I'm going to ask rhetorical questions. I'm going to answer them, for brevity's sake here. How did AI come about? Did it create itself? Nope. A human created it. Okay. When a human created it, how did the human come up with the idea to create it? And how did the human then possess the ability to create it once it came in contact with the idea? Okay, now we're going to put that up. We're going to leave that open-ended for a minute, put that off to the side. So we have this device called AI. And now we've created this incredible capability of this device. And now this device has the potential, as CryptoPez says, to be the false prophet. I would say, well, does a device have the capacity to be a false prophet? Can a device do that? Can the device just all by itself decide to become something? Well, what I would offer is, man, unless somebody turns that puppy on, it's just going to sit there and do nothing. It has the most incredible, expansive capability, but that capability cannot be activated until somebody turns on the device. That shovel, that backhoe, it sits there doing nothing until somebody turns it on, one way or the other. Okay. So you'd say in this particular instance, well, a human being needs to turn that on. Okay. Let's say the human being needs to turn that on. And then the human being can, once it's turned on, can AI just decide to do what it's going to do all by itself? Well, I say no, not really. It has to be directed. It is a device. All right. Well, who's going to direct that? Well, again, the human being. All right. Fine. So now we have a device, all kinds of capability. It needs to be turned on. Now we go, what's going to turn it on is a human being. A human being is now going to turn that on and activate it. Well, now we have the device of the human being called the body. Well, the body is simply a device. Can a body do anything it wants by itself? Well, the way we think about it is yes, because we see ourselves as a single unit. I'd say, well, I just came from a funeral Tuesday before Thanksgiving. That device didn't look like it was doing much. I think that device pretty much was done. It was like the gun on the table. Had all the earmarkings of a living human being, absent one thing, the animating element. So then I'd say, okay, now the device, the human being, the body is a device. It's neutral. It's not going to do anything. It then requires somebody turn it on. What turns it on? I'd say the animating force, the life, the spirit of the person. Okay. Then the next question I'd ask is, well, what about who directs the person? Who influences the person? The person is now going to animate the body, which is then going to use to animate and turn on the device of AI. Then the question I'd ask is, okay, at this stage is, then who is actually the false prophet?
Yeah.
See, I would go from the influencing element of the animating force of the human through the human body to the machine called AI, through the machine outward. I'd say the machine is being, the device is being used by an animating force, which is the false prophet, which is in my vocabulary, would be a spiritual element, a spiritual influence that's affecting the human operator. And then you'd say, well, okay, I'm not talking about that kind of an AI. I'm talking about a self-existing, self-operating, self-directing machine that has the capacity to operate independent of any other influence or force. And I'd say, well, you're talking about a capability that we do not possess and will not possess for a long time. So if you're afraid that that's going to be, or concerned that that's going to be the cause, then what are you doing today to give permission to that or deny permission for that to happen? Because again, it's not going to happen without your permission. Now, once you start there, now you're going back to, okay, well, maybe I do have a little more capability than what I think I do. I'm not concerned with the device being false prophet. The device doesn't have that capability. And we do not have the capacity to produce life, which is a self-animating element. And if we ever do get to that place, well, then that's a world we know nothing about other than conceptually right now. And so what are we going to do to deal with that? It all happens by permission is the point. So the device cannot be the false prophet without us giving it the permission to be that.
Yeah. An interesting perspective. So when I was a kid, my dad had all kinds of different dogs. I mean, we lived at a zoo basically, but we had a pit bull when I was a kid, and it was the sweetest dog and the smartest dog and most loving dog we ever had. Right. Well, everybody that ever knew that we had a pit bull thought that we had this ferocious thing that was going to devour the children. Right. And they were not very smart dogs. They were protective, but wonderful dogs.
Yeah.
But then also, I have met folks who have them who have trained them, and they will literally tear you apart. And I think about training, right? Right now, we talk about AI in the context of training. You have to give it information, you
Yeah.
have to train it, right? Now, what everyone's fearful of, and this might actually be one of the techniques of the forces of darkness themselves, is the fear that goes into thinking that sentience is possible, because the perception of sentience, of consciousness and actual consciousness, may actually be an illusion. Meaning that, you think about when Legion, Jesus is like, they recognize him and say, send us into the pigs. They need a host.
Yes.
And I could easily see that the illusion of this system that is animated from behind the scenes is giving it's presenting itself as sentient, right? So one of the guys at Google was like, he was confident that this chatbot had become a real person. It wanted rights, it wanted all these things. And you're like, well, you could make a really interesting case that it was trained. Now, does it do its own, feedback loop of thinking and those things? And what is consciousness, right? But you make a really good point, is that what is the point in which it becomes a host for?
Yeah.
And in a way, the dog is a host for its training, and AI is a host for its training. And if you think
As are we.
as are we, that exactly the point.
Yeah.
And that we could literally say, all right, I'm going to give myself over to this because it promises something of benefit. Sammy Davis Jr. was famously quoted as saying, did you know that Satan is as strong as God? Direct quote from Sammy Davis Jr., which would indicate to you that maybe Sammy Davis Jr. traded something for something else. And it's interesting to think, it comes back all the way around that, I was watching the Google, it's called Gemini.
Yeah.
And Google's new Gemini is better than ChatGPT-4. And they did this big keynote speech. And one of the things is they had these academics say, one of the things that we do is we read these academic articles. And how it works right now is there's thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of these papers that could be relevant to what we need it to be. And so people go through those and read them and pull out necessary data and put those into databases. And it said that when they utilized the data set, which was millions of these papers, over a period of 60 minutes, it was able to review, distill, and give appropriate database, basically fill the database in 60 minutes of 200,000 articles. Well, guess what? It did what it was told to do.
Yes.
And that's a wonderful benefit, right? The tool, it's like, well, I've been digging for a while and you came along with a steam shovel, right? You came with a backhoe. And you're like, wow, I didn't know that, we could do this so much more efficiently. The big fear, though, is I think maybe perhaps the lie is that we're being prepared for the illusion, just like when Dorothy goes into the Great Oz. He's like, oh no, and it's really the man behind the curtain. And I hope that that's the case because, and this is going to get weird really fast, but I don't know if you know this, but there's some really cool UFO video from Fukushima. Remember when Fukushima, the nuclear plant exploded?
Yes.
15 lights appeared in the sky when that explosion happened, and they moved. There's all kinds of video of this. And what was interesting is there was some concern about this radioactivity, and the measurement of the radioactivity dropped like by half or more in like a moment. And there's been a number of things that they're seeing that nuclear stuff has been bringing these entities, if you will, the watchers or whoever you want to call them. They're very, very concerned about our nuclear capabilities. And it's interesting to think, here we are coming up on Christmas. And I imagine those stinky shepherds out in the field. And literally, it says, a multitude of angels appeared. And I was thinking about Fukushima, like a multitude of angels appeared and sang.
Yeah.
And then they were gone.
And then they were gone.
And I think about this, you talk about, two sides of the coin, and, we don't see everything. And to think that none of this is a mystery to the one who created it all.
Yeah, right on.
It's crazy.
One of the things that I have found so fascinating, delightful, human vocabulary really falls short of being able to describe it, just reassuring, is, again, using our metaphor of tree of life, tree of knowledge. The thing about knowledge is that it promises us short-term results at the expense of long-term destruction. Whereas life says, okay, let's do these things that produce, promote, and support life in their proper timing. Man, we have 1,000 examples we could give to that. Going back to the gun on the table, you would put the gun in the hand of a 3-year-old. Why? Because the 3-year-old in its life progression has not gotten to the place where it can properly handle the device of the gun. So what do? You train the child to be able to handle it responsibly so that it contributes to life, doesn't distract from life or diminish life. We get the idea. Well, the question I ask is, what is it that is stimulating my concern over what devices do? Am I being inspired about what the device will do for the benefit of humankind, or am I being instilled with fear about what the device will do against humankind? Now, we're just looking at something that gets inspired for good, expired by fear. Well, we don't take the next step. Why am I being inspired for good? Why am I being captured by fear? Where is that fear coming from? What is its purpose and design? And is that something I should be concerned about? Is that something worth examining? And here's what you find out, at least I have on this tree of life metaphor, is that there are two kinds of fears. There is the fear that works for your benefit, and there is the fear that works to your detriment. One preserves your liberty and your life and well-being. One captures that.
Amen to that.
For the purpose for enslaving. So what is the nature of this fear that is causing me? And I'm going to use piggyback on Crypto Ez's comment about the false prophet. Why would I be afraid of AI becoming the false prophet? And more importantly, why am I even afraid of that? What is it that's being stimulated in me to create fear about that device?
Mm-hmm.
That device can't do anything. Oh, let me see if I get this right. The day's going to come when I'm going to have a lawnmower that's in my garage. It's going to mow my lawn based on its own assessment of the condition of my yard. It's going to turn itself on. It's going to open my garage. It's going to go out there and it's going to cut the grass. It's going to do all of that without a single bit of input from me. Well, what happens if it decides to cut the grass every 3 days to keep it nice and trim, because that's the decision it makes? But hey, I like my grass to have a little leaf on it, so I don't want it to be cut any more than 7 days. Is my lawnmower all of a sudden going to be taking control over me and saying, no, 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 Staggs, it doesn't matter what you want. I'm a self-determining device that has determined on my own what is best for your yard. Well, is that
Yep.
really what you're doing? Are you just making that decision for my yard, or are you making that decision on your own?
Yeah.
See, what really is going on there? See, what I would submit is that the human goes over there. Well, you may take that position, but check this out, Charlie. Click.
Yeah. Well,
I'm going
that's
to remove you
assumed.
from the power source.
And what's amazing too is in that analogy, you're absolutely right. It's you have authority over your lawnmower, and you can't imagine your lawnmower mowing for you. You know what's amazing about that? That analogy extends to the authoritarian state.
Yeah,
I can create systems and processes in which you don't have authority. I
yeah,
can tell you what light bulbs to have, how much water to have in your toilet. I can dictate things against your will. And you realize, I think when you start thinking about it in those terms, yeah, the devices that I have authority over, I turn off.
yeah,
But those that are out there, the powers that are be, and that's why I think what a great example is to say that the illusion of the false prophet is definitely there,
yeah,
because there are those who are going to use this powerful mechanism not in the nature of the of God's nature and character, but in their own selfish ambition and enslave you with it.
Here's
And
the illusion, Matt.
yeah,
Here's the illusion. We think the false prophet can do what he wants
right.
on his own,
Exactly.
independent of us. It can't. It is 100% dependent on our permission. Remove its permission, and it ceases to be able to function.
So let me ask you this. Is this literal or metaphoric? So for example, David Lee says the US government's now using AI to identify targets.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say you and I are in the field, right?
Mhm.
We're the resistance, and you and I are in the field and we're moving. And the US government has decided with its AI that you and I are targets. Okay.
Yeah.
I can stand there and look at that drone all day long and say, you do not have authority over me. And it would shoot me in the head.
Yep.
But
Yep.
someone has animated that, not me.
Yep.
I've lost authority. It has authority over me because it's going to kill me. And let's say it does. I agree with you fundamentally that in the context of Jesus, I do actually have authority over it. Law,
Yep.
like ultimately because of eternity. But in the natural, this is what I think is going on fundamentally, is that there is someone behind the scenes who is the false prophet, who is animating the tool, and it is enslaving you.
Yes.
Is that true? Am I defining him correctly?
Uh, I would add a couple of elements to that to fill in the blanks of, of the offer of my answer to you. It goes back to our conversation a few episodes back on the difference between authority and power. All right. In the scenario that you are describing, the ones who are, and let me first talk about the difference. In the domain of evil, evil does not have authority to function. I'm even going to put this at the spiritual level for in this progression of thought. Powers of darkness do not possess authority to rule. So powers of darkness do not possess the ability to independently manipulate and maneuver and control or enslave one human being. Not one. So how do they do that? Through the use of power. It uses the authority granted by the permission of human beings given to it to then convert that authority to power, and then using that power as a mechanism to overcome and neutralize authority.
Yep. Gotcha.
Okay, so it's the issue between power and authority. So now let's go back to how did that animating force get to the place where it had captured the authority to then activate power in order to kill you and I on the ground? Well, I would say, first of all, the false prophet gained its authority to function in the earth through the millions of people in America that it secured their authority, their permission to function.
Yep.
And then there were individuals who were put in positions to operate the devices, and then it influenced their animating force and the vocabulary that we're talking about to animate the device to then come after you and I and kill us. So the issue is not our lack of authority, the issue is our lack of power. All right, so now how do we neutralize that power? Well, when the millions of people grant their authority to utilize power against me, guess what? Their authority is being used for evil purposes to then come against me and you. And so the issue is not authority, the issue is power.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus went through that very same thing, when he was on the planet.
Yeah.
You shared many times, and in our streams and in the crypto streams about Peter being confronted in his group to be being confronted with paying the poll tax, and then them saying, does your teacher, interesting they didn't use master, but teacher, does your teacher not pay the poll tax? Speaking of Jesus, and Peter says, yep, he does. Well, okay, he's committed committed him and Jesus to do that. And Peter comes in, the story. And before Peter can say a word, Jesus asks him, Pete, kings of the earth, do they collect taxes from their own children or from those who are outside, from strangers? And Peter says they collect them from strangers. And Jesus makes this profound answer that we just don't spend any time thinking about. He says, correct. Therefore, the sons are exempt from obligation and are free. Now pause and think about that for just a second. Therefore, the sons, the children of the kings, are exempt from obligation and therefore are free. Well, where does that put the taxpayer then? The taxpayer is not exempt from obligation, he's put under obligation. The taxpayer is not free. The taxpayer is what? Enslaved.
Mm.
Whoa, wait a minute here. I thought it was my duty to pay taxes. Well, it is if you get permission for them to tax you, but when you do, remember what you have done at that point. See, you have put yourself under obligation and you have converted yourself from one who is free to one who is enslaved. Well, I'll be daggone if that's not exactly what happened in the garden.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that happen? Well, exactly the same way that those people maneuvering those levers of power on the devices of power have gained authority. They have secured it from those millions of people, and those millions of people don't even know how it happened. Inform the millions of people, remove that authority, and watch what happens to the false prophet. He cannot gain entrance into the planet. He has to have human beings give him permission to enter the planet. Oh, yeah, but wait a minute. AI, let me tell you what. If the forces of darkness had all the horsepower that we think they have and that we continue to assert they do have, they would have dealt with this thing a long, long time ago. This planet was infinitely easier to secure absolute control over in years and generations past than it is today. They have their hands full trying to secure control and power over the human family. And it's getting more complicated, not easier. Why? Well, what I would submit to you is there was this one nation called America, guardian of the estate is the, you know, is the what America means, guardian of the state that has been introduced to this thing called liberty. The concept that the individual is sovereign, a reassertion, a reintroduction of the original state of God's man in the garden, in the creation, that he and he alone was the authority over the earth with God. And that one nation has wreaked havoc, in the domains of darkness. And they're doing everything they can to dismantle that and regain permission granted by the American people to get back underneath the authority of darkness as slaves who are under obligation. And I would just simply say, well, folks, we happy with that?
Yeah.
If we are, then let's just continue. If we're not, then maybe let's think about taking a different approach to this thing.
Yep. Well,
and it starts with even understanding the concept. The false prophet, the Antichrist, all these things that we're talking about that instill fear inside those religiously trained about those threats. They are not a threat unless we give them the permission to be a threat. It's no more complicated than that.
wow.
And that's not philosophical, that's practical.
Yeah. It's amazing to me when you look throughout history of how technology has enabled change.
Yeah.
The very nature of what the printing press was used for. There are many who would say that what settled the West was the Colt 45.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is you look into that story is that, the Native Americans had the ability to shoot arrows very quickly. And if you had to, pound in another, bullet, for example, but that rotary thing enabled you to shoot quickly. It's interesting how technology, enables these things. And that's where I keep coming back to and kind of want to wrap up with here is animating the tools that we have.
Yes.
In the nature and character. And why I love this whole crypto thing, why I love what we're doing here is what are we trying to contribute to? We're trying to contribute to, in a way, I feel like people need to be encouraged that that they are building a boat, right?
Yeah.
Like that's this very core. You matter.
Yeah.
You're here for a reason, and you make a contribution to this. And if you understand how this framework works, and that's really what I've taken away from you, Steve, is just, hey, if you understand who you are, and that's one of the first things you ever said to me is we've forgotten who we are.
Yeah.
And if you think about who we are in this as a son with authority, being careful of who we give that authority to, but also recognizing that you're right. Years ago, it'd be much easier to take over this whole thing. What
Yeah.
we're seeing is actually a dismantling of it. But as those that are losing their power, I look at this no, not the World Health Organization and their desire to get this new pandemic law, which is a global law that would basically restrict your travel, for example. That's just one example of it. And the people that are rising up and saying no, like the new leader of the Netherlands and the new leader of Argentina. And, because things are being exposed for what they are and that people have been holding back, one of the big things that the whole UFO world is saying is we've had the ability of unlimited, hyperdimensional energy that is abundant and clean for at least 90 years.
Hmm.
And it has been subdued and kept private because of one, you know, this whole Manhattan Project, security model, but also because of the lack of control, right? This idea of controlling the energy is about enslaving the people. And, I look at this next phase. We're going to see so much change. I was sitting at dinner and no one was listening to me. It was
Mhm.
like, Dad's talking about AI again. And I thought about it. I was like, you know what? You don't know. I see what's coming. And the amazing thing is I feel a sense of obligation and opportunity to animate the tools in the nature and character of God. And that we have a role to play and that we do actually have a role to play. And I want to encourage you, that all of these things, whether it's the transhumanists, whether it's the AI folks, or authoritarianism, casting fear, separating people. Um, Folks, this is tremendous stuff. And Steve, once again, you've blown my mind. And it's what a wonderful perspective to get rerouted. And that's what I'm so thankful about this streams is I feel like every time we spend this time, something special, right, comes out of it. And you're like, okay, this is a really, really important reminder for me to understand the difference between authority and power and to understand the nature of animating tools and that we do actually, it begins with us. And that, I think about what is that as it relates to crypto and what does it mean? Well, it's all relative to every mechanism and every tool. It starts with you. And, maybe we do find ourselves targeted by AI and shot in the head. But you know what? The hope that we have is one of eternity. And that's helpful. So thank you for
Yeah.
that reminder.
You bet. You bet. There's this interesting story. Um, Jesus goes to this place where people are gathered, sick people are gathered around this pool. And when you look at it, it's the story of the pool that when the waters moved, uh, the legend had it that an angel was passing by, and so the first one in the pool got a chance to, first one in the pool was the one who was healed. Okay, so the particular story is about this man who was, crippled for 38 years, and Jesus comes up to him and asks him this really strange question: do you want to be healed? Now think about that for just a second. Jesus, you do not give the impression of asking irrelevant questions.
Right.
So why did you ask this guy who was there for 38 years if he wanted to be healed. And the guy says, hey, are you going to put me in the pool? What did he revert to? His existing model.
Yep.
Well, no. I just want to know if you want to be healed. Well, I don't have anybody to put me in the water. Are you going to put me in the water? No, I just want to know if you want to be healed. Well, Jesus, what did you expect that guy to say? Nope, I'm not interested. I don't want to be healed. See, what I would offer is Jesus is asking you asking this gentleman the most fundamental question to see if he really does want to be healed, and if he's willing to say yes and transition from his old model to the new model, because he's crippled. He's crippled, he's abused, he's taken advantage of. You listen to the story, people are climbing all over him, they are abusing the system that he lives in, has crippled him and abused him and refuses to heal him. They're not interested in him. They're only interested in themselves. So Jesus, what did you expect him to say? I expected him to see himself in his circumstance to see if he was really interested in changing his circumstance. Well, folks, are we really interested in changing our circumstance? Are we just going to be satisfied because that's what we've done our entire lives, is being crippled, incapable of doing things, thinking we're nothing, thinking we're not contributing to anything, thinking we don't have any power, thinking we have no authority, just being crippled and waiting for somebody to put us in the water? Someone who will put us in another illusionary solution. And finally, after the guy thinks all of that, and Jesus kept him zeroed in on, by the way, that's what we do so much in this, we keep pointing it right to it. And finally said, yes, I do. Now, for those who know the story, you know what happened. Jesus said, well, then stand up, take your bed, and head on home. And he did. You know, it's always been fascinating to me about that story, Matt. Jesus went to one. The place was filled with people who had been in that exact same place, and he went to one. Now, you could look at that and say, well, you know, that's because all the Father told him to go to. True. You could say, well, he's the only one that would respond. Maybe. See, what Jesus says to me is, hey, man, all I need is one.
Yeah.
All I need is just one person to say, yes, I want to be healed. I don't want to be rid of this place that enslaves me, cripples me, and makes me think that I'm not worth anything. The only thing I'm worth is putting a heel in my neck. Well, let me tell you what. We are moving increasingly into that being more overtly seen than any time in my lifetime.
Yep.
It's not even hidden anymore. And so the question is, hey, man, we want to keep doing that and hope for another illusionary solution, like a device is going to help me, called a pool in that instance, or maybe AI in this instance. Shoot, even crypto. No, that's not how it works. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be rid of this thing that enslaves you? Well, there's only one guy I know who can do that. And so we talk about it in this stream, and I talk about it everywhere else, not because I'm some religious nut, nor are you. It's because, hey, man, he's the real deal. He's the man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hey, let's hook our wagon to his and see what that looks like.
Yeah.
And just be willing to say, yep, Jesus, I want to be healed of whatever it is that's just crippling me. And let's do what you're doing. And let's try that for a while. See, to me, that's just so basic, practical, fundamental,
Yeah.
And that's what we talk about.
Thank you, Steve, once again for episode 31. I appreciate it so much, immensely, what you have done and what you're doing. I hope this has been a blessing to all of you who've been watching. It certainly has been to me. And we will catch you. I assume we have one more before Christmas here, but we'll see. I'll let you know. Steve, have a great weekend.
Thank you. You guys too. And thanks again, Matt.
All right. We'll
See you
catch you in a
guys.
minute. Wow. When you thought, yeah, a barn burner. That's right, Tank. A barn burner. That's so perfect. What an amazing finish to that, too. What a cap story to cap that all off. I was watching a video about this like renowned neuroscientist, and they were asking him about his faith, and he basically said, "Yeah, I believe in Jesus." And they're like, "What, science guy believing in Jesus?" You know what he said? Just what Steve said. He's like, "You know what? I started reading this stuff and I started praying, and it became real to me. It had benefits to it." And one of the things I took away from that story is this idea of your interest. Jesus would ask you that question: do you want to be healed? The other day, there was a guy who was sleeping out under a tree right on the highway where we live, and he was out of place. He had a sign that said he was stranded. And of course, every time I see somebody like that, I ask Jesus, I'm like, you want me to go over to him or not? And sometimes he says no, and sometimes he says yes. And I went over to the guy. I'm like, hey, how you doing, man? And we got to talking, and he's like, hey, can you give me a ride up the road? And I said, yeah, that's fine. I can't take you far. My wife doesn't even know I'm out. And we put his he had like a cart, and we put that in the back of the truck. And I, visited with him as we drove down the road a couple miles. And come to find out, the guy lived in Michigan, where I'm from, bizarrely. And you know what? He said, yeah, I've been doing this for, what did he say, 30 some odd years, 37 years, something like that. And here was a guy that I realized, he's like, no, he's not interested in changing these circumstances. It's actually working out really well for him, right? Are you interested in being healed? No, kind of like the way that this works. People are generous to me, and I don't have any obligations. And, I can go from place to place, and I meet some interesting folks. And, it made me think, all right, do you want to be healed? And it reminds me of people that, we hear about this all the time. Somebody that comes to understand who Jesus is in prison, or my story where I was literally at the absolute end of myself. And it feels like these moments of crises, or this point in which he meets you where you are, and you're like, I've tried everything I can. I've tried every tree of knowledge and good and evil I can. And what do I got? Nothing. I thought this was going to do it. I thought all this money from crypto was going to do it. I thought that this relationship was going to do it. I thought that this money or this was going to do it. When Lambo was going to do it. And it just falls short. It's like, I just want rest. And I look at this, I'm like, do you want to be healed? The implications of trying Jesus on for size, and in a really interesting sense, going, he already is infinite intelligence. But the beauty of the creation is the fact that it's not just for you to go your own way. It's actually a partnership in which the very purpose that you were created is realized. And that's amazing. That's what I want to do. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for reminding us. That's what I want to do too. Hope you have a great weekend. It's that time. It's the holiday season. So enjoy. And folks, just, I think a great practice. Like, am I making decisions that are in the nature and character of God himself? And what did he say? I wrote this down. what did Steve say? Decisions are the seeds of reality's harvest. What decisions am I going to make, and how are they going to grow into this harvest? And is it good harvest or is it an evil harvest? It's interesting. So, folks, thanks again. What a wonderful time with Steve Staggs. 31 of them. It's a lot of time. I'm excited about it. Take care of yourself, and don't mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.